if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about yourself, your role, today's topic, and we can dive right in.
Great. Thank you so much, Nikki. I appreciate this, and Sophia as well, and just the opportunity to be able to share a bit about democratic dialogue in a space that's outside of my own, outside of competitive communications. So thank you all for coming, for taking the time to coming, and for just providing mental space to be able to add just one extra thing on a day that we know is and was and still is quite highly charged, but really exciting too in its own right. So yeah, once again, Sarah Hinkle. I've been at Colorado College for 10 years, and I'm so fortunate to have such a diverse role on this campus that expands well beyond competitive speech and debate. And one of my absolute favorite tasks roles that I'm tasked with rather is being able to create and develop communication workshops outside of competitive communications and bring them to you. And this cross-curricular workshop type training is near and dear to my heart. I have a master's degree in education and in communication and literacy. And so what that means is deconstructing is just very simply making content matter in an inclusive way to any audience, regardless of background and circumstance, and to get you excited and invested about why you are sitting here today. So I have a big task in front of me. The timing, like I said, is quite charged, and I'm really excited to break down democratic dialogue and what your role is within that space. And in order to do this in a way that I think will be the most fruitful is I encourage all of you to put pen to paper in this next hour. And what I mean by that is have an opportunity to stop. I'm going to give you time to be reflective and take notes about what your role is, what your goals are, what you'd like to do in the next year and beyond past inauguration day, to be able to have some conversations that may fall outside of your comfort zone. So please, like I mentioned, I will allow for some reflection time. So use it, and use that time to ask questions in the chat, to comment. You do not have to. And I do want to create first, right out the gate, just because I personally like talking about really difficult content matter to people who may be contrarian. I realize that's not everyone's cup of tea, right? And so I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. This is not supposed to be divisive in any way. Like I mentioned, this is more of a self-exploration in a way that you can maybe push your own boundaries and maybe take that, how risk averse you are, and just raise the stakes just a little, right? And how you can maybe contribute more to some difficult dialogue. Okay, so does anybody have any questions before I just launch into it? Because I'm going to just launch into it. And once again, thank you all for coming. And yeah, this is awesome to have such a great audience. Cool. Okay, well, when starting out, any good speaker will tell you that when starting out any talk, you want to start, it's called with framing and creating a framework. And this framework ideally is an inclusive framework. So I want to be thinking about what I can get everyone aligned to and get us all on the same page. And so with that in mind, I read something that was so profoundly simple and obvious, but really needs to be stated. And that is two things, is that we currently exist in a nation that's quite divided. And not only is our nation divided right now, we also live in a world of massive distraction. Right. And so we're all, by nature, humans, we're easily distracted. And I think we can all agree that in the last 20 plus years, pretty much anything that's been invented sort of contributes to that said distraction in some way. And the reason why that's problematic is that any sort of distraction prevents us from living with purpose, right? So from having a purpose-driven life. And I think that fundamentally, you all wouldn't be in this seat today at CC if you weren't goal-oriented in living a more purpose-driven and centered life. And that goal is different for each one of us, but I think we can all agree on these sort of tenets, right, moving forward. So when thinking of that idea and taking this idea of politics, which is kind of an icky word nowadays, right? It's thinking about what your obligation is, your civic duty, and part of what your obligation is to yourself, but also beyond yourself to your community. All right, what is your civic obligation with politics, to yourself and to your community? And of course, there's the givens, right? It's to vote, right? And to make and informed decisions by reading about different policies and understanding why you're voting or wanting to vote in a certain way. So educating ourselves. But one thing that is I find lacking is that we are sort of turned off by the idea of having conversations around the vote and why people outside of people, excuse me, with people outside of our ideological differences, right? And so when you think about the idea of learning and seeking truth, it's not about seeking community that confirms our existing knowledge bases. It's about people that push us in different directions and opening and broadening perspectives and getting us to think and understand why someone, the why behind someone's value system, even if it's very different than our own. And I realize this is incredibly idealistic. Okay, so I take that stance. So I acknowledge that. I'm going to break this down to this is very complex. It's not easy. And in no way am I trying to say, like, this is so accessible and easy. I expect you to go out and do this tomorrow, right? So I acknowledge that, right? But in order to truly make a sustained effort outside of the vote and making a difference is by starting those conversations. So today, my goal is to show you and provide tools on how you could do that, and also should you do that, because there are some people, right? After having dialogue, you realize you need to abort the mission, that it's not worth having the conversation. So in no way am I suggesting that everyone you engage with is someone that you should be, creating this highly engaged conversation over ideological differences, right? So it's also about not wasting time. I fundamentally do not believe we should be time wasters, right? Because that's distraction. So going back to the idea of distraction, what are you allowing yourself to be distracted by? And how can we get you recentered to be more purpose-driven with this idea of having civil discourse with people outside of your ideological scope? So let me share the screen with you so you have something else to look at. All right, being able to dive in to exploring ideological differences, there's two concepts that come to mind that we all need, two tenets that we all need to really think about. And the first is intellectual humility. And that one is tough. That it's the acknowledgement that we don't really know all the things, especially when those things are really strongly tied to identity or lived experiences and our truths, right? So thinking of that. And then second is broadening perspectives with empathy. Empathy is a word that gets tossed around a lot, especially when Brene Brown became crazily famous when she got up on stage and did her TED Talk, right? And she started talking about empathy and the importance of empathy and suspending judgment. These two ideas are a lot easier said and written down on paper. So with those two concepts, those two core concepts, we all can say, yeah, I'm not going to be able to do that instantly, but I will show you ways that you can be able to start tackling both of those Everests, because they are. So first and foremost, why do it? Why do it in the first place? Why practice habits in humility and practices in perspective taking? Someone in chat talked to me, why even bother with this conversation? Why not just stay risk averse? Because it's a lot more comfortable, right? Anybody? I can't see chat when PowerPoint is up. So Nikki, if someone shouts, or Sophia, if someone writes anything, and just let me know. Okay, everyone's still thinking. That's okay. I want you to think, right? So thinking about why you're here and what your purpose is, and how can you deconstruct democratic dialogue and tackle some difficult conversations. Think about what your unique purpose is. Setting expectations. So thinking about, okay, I'm ready to have a conversation about something that I'm really passionate about. I know this person thinks very differently than I do. How can I go in there, have the conversations, but have realistic expectations set so I'm protecting myself, right? So you're protecting yourself and the receiver, frankly. That awareness piece of being able to sort of have a radar of, is this the time, the place, the opportunity to have this conversation? Because again, going back to that core tenet of, is this a distraction? When I think distraction, and my debaters know how I feel about this because I soapbox about this probably more than they care to hear, is with social media, right? Social media is like the utmost distraction. And I think most of us, if you are on social media, are, if not guilty, contributing to distraction and dialogue, but reading comments, right? And just going down and reading all the comments of what people are writing. And is that contributing? How is that contributing? Okay, so distraction and that awareness. Social media, mental work. What sort of work am I asking you to do to prepare for before the conversation even takes place? So let me just caveat this with, I can give you scores of data and information and tools to use to prepare you mentally for being able to tackle a difficult conversation. But all that to say that in no way is a conversation formulaic. So I can't roadmap the whole conversation out for you, because conversations segue and they dead end and you reach impasses with others, right? But you will have the ability to understand how to detour out of them in a way that you're not completely depleted emotionally and you don't walk away going, that was the biggest waste of time. Okay. Listening skills. We all know active listening skills. This is applying active listening skills directly to engaging in democratic dialogue. And then hopefully some time for reflection where I won't be talking at you the whole hour, because that gets old. Okay.
Throw out a comment from the chat. Personal has shared, comfort does not allow personal growth, nor does it lend to collective community knowledge. And I just want to add on to that comment. I do appreciate that end piece of it not lending to collective community knowledge. That's personally not something I tend to think of when I think of stepping out of my comfort zone. I do more so think of that personal growth. So just really appreciate like that extension of it also is not beneficial for community knowledge building.
Absolutely. Yes. We don't want to create these homogenized communities where we're all just confirming each other's beliefs, right? We want to be pushed. That's what active learning is all about, is that's where growth occurs, right? And it can't happen if we are constantly creating communities, whether they're communities online or within our physical spaces, of people that think, believe, do, and act exactly the same way we think, believe, and do, and act. And to be able to be outside of those spaces and to walks where other people are living very different lives and have very different ideological perspectives is an incredible privilege. It is an incredible privilege to observe that, because you're experiencing firsthand how people's identities are built. And that's huge. And that's power, is what that is. And that's our power, being in college, being at the university, knowledge, and being able to, construct information, to be able to understand what it means to have critical listening skills, to be able to critically reflect, to ask difficult questions. And all of that is power. And so your job today is to think in this agenda, okay, I've got this power. How do I use it as a student, faculty, staff member? We all have it within us. And, we do all the time hit upon views that we are frankly quite repulsed by, right? But in order to be able to grow, you have to be able to face really difficult subject matter. What that looks like and what your role is unique. Okay.
And just want to credit Kimberly Reese with that comment. Thank you for sharing that, Kimberly.
Yeah, thank you, Kimber. Thank you. Okay, it's getting really serious, and I knew it would because I get really serious really fast. So I'm trying to lighten it up a little bit and talk about first about what makes you uncomfortable. And I want everyone to add to this chat. This doesn't have to be what makes you uncomfortable within talking politics. What makes you uncomfortable in life? What makes you uncomfortable with public speaking? And so here's my little list, right? So showing up late to anything absolutely makes me break out into a cold sweat. It doesn't even matter if it's, showing up late to the dentist where the stakes are fairly low because I know they're still going to take me anyway. I hate it. It makes my brain bleed. So that is first and foremost. That's probably my biggest. Loose ends with old friends. You know why that makes me uncomfortable, y'all, is because I sort of sit on the fringe of a communicator where I really enjoy difficult conversations and I'd rather face that head on and deal with it, whatever the outcome is, even if it's just we can't move forward in this relationship. And it's been wonderful, knowing you, and best of luck to you moving on. I find that most people are sort of averse to those conversations. And so sometimes loose ends sit, but those sit with me wrong and they bother me because I like to have that closure with communication, even if the conversation is difficult. And then of course, The Office, I always think of Michael Scott. I can't watch it comfortably. Other people can see the humor, and occasionally I can, but most of the time I'm really cringing because of how he engages with others in a way that's always socially inappropriate, way on the other end of the scale. And then finally, kind of bringing it back home to what it is that why we're here today, is that assuming a position from which I might have to change my position. And that really speaks toward that concept, as I mentioned, of intellectual humility and that understanding of there is no way that anybody knows all the things about a certain topic that there is to know. We all experience life in different lenses and we all have something to contribute, right? And then it's 100% okay to take the stance and say, I actually don't know enough about this topic to be able to have as well-formed of an opinion as I would like to say that I originally thought at the start of this conversation, right? And that takes intellectual humility to admit that. And it's unfortunate because there really should not be any sort of shame attached to ignorance, right? There's no shame in ignorance. And if you think about divisiveness and the division in this country, one of the first appeals that people go toward is attacking people directly on their ignorance. And what happens is it creates shame. And in no way does shame ever motivate people to change. If you think about shame, in no way am I an expert of shame, but I soak up a lot of information regarding motivations for persuasion. That's my background in rhetoric. And so thinking about what makes you uncomfortable, you can add number 5 to feeling any sense of shame. So I ask you to divorce shame from ignorance. There's no shame in not knowing. I'm going to take a minute and I want you all to think about something that makes you uncomfortable. And as I said, I'd love to see some posts. I'm going to go to the chat. I think, oh, here we go. Okay. Micromanaging, policing what others say and how they should act. Did Kimber, did you write that? I can't see Kimber, but.
Yes, that was my 5th one.
Thank you. Thank you.
No worries.
What else makes you uncomfortable?
For me, or generally the group?
Generally the group. Kimber, that's fantastic and absolutely falls within the scope. Thank you for sharing. Write it down and think about what you aren't sharing. Think about the idea of democratic dialogue, what makes you uncomfortable. So much of our identities are linked to voter issues and what side of the spectrum that we're on, right? And so it feels like a personal attack. So moving forward, I'm going to take a moment to have you read this. And I do want to just acknowledge my space and privilege. This was posted by a wonderful colleague and debate coach and communications professor, and it just about moved me to tears because it's very difficult to summarize in a paragraph why people become highly emotional in really difficult conversations, right? And why that's used as a tool for weakness, as it really shouldn't be. And I go back to this position and this concept of power, right? And so I want to take the time right now to really acknowledge the privilege of, I am a white woman who is really fortunate enough to get an education and whose job is reliant that I read for growth and understanding on really complex topics such as race, equity, power dynamics. And I want you to understand that my obligation today is to acknowledge and really lift this statement up. Okay, these topics, they inflict emotion, are normal. It is normal to become emotional about some of these topics, right? And not wanting to exercise your said power that I'm speaking of your understanding to a particular person in a heightened moment of stress is always and 100% your right to make. What I ask is that you don't give up, that you come back to it if the person is willing to have that conversation and if there's mutual respect involved. Acknowledge the duress, take a break, and come back. Okay. Emotions are normal. It's a normal reaction. We all fall on a scale of emotional volatility. Okay. And there's always a lot of variables at play. And the understanding of power dynamics, that awareness is power. That already is power, understanding what that is and what that looks like. Other variables, topic at hand, the interpersonal relationship that you have with that person, right? It's a very different conversation that I have with my father, who's highly conservative across the dinner table, than I would with someone that I meet on a speech tournament, right? Right, the interpersonal dynamics shift. So thinking about how invested are you in this topic? I have a really good friend when I get all hot and heavy about a crazy topic and I get all emotionally invested in it. She always pulls me back and says, Sarah, do you really want to die on this hill today? And I have to step back and think about how much real estate this topic's taking in my head. Do I want to die on this hill? Maybe not. Maybe it's not worth that much, right? Emotional volatility or depleting me emotionally. But if you feel heated and there's this mutual respect, taking a minute of silence, acknowledging how difficult it is for you, and providing empathy for each other and understanding this is hard, it's so important to understand. Thinking about why people, the why behind people's belief systems. Okay, that leads us really, really naturally into establishing psychological safety. This is kind of a meta slide because it's applying to today's session, as well as I hope that you will establish norms of psychological safety and what that looks like prior to having difficult conversations. Sometimes you can't plan for it, right? You might meet someone randomly wherever, at the grocery store, you're both reading the headline of a magazine and you catch each other's eye and someone says something that might be offensive or difficult to hear. So you have to ask yourself, okay, if I engage in conversation, what are you hoping happens after this said conversation? Is it worth it? Okay. And in this conversation, are you really interested in learning about the other people's ideas, or are you listening to debate? Are you listening to win? In this conversation, are you hoping to really get ahead and convey your own ideas? Are you willing to be the backseat driver, the host, if you will, and be gracious and let the other person share more of their ideas, even though you really want to share, right? Is there a lasting connection following this conversation? This conversation. When I think of difficult conversations, I have an extended family where we're a house divided. Very different sets of values. I am the only daughter that works at a small private liberal arts college. I have 3 sisters. Nearly every conversation is working against the tide. And I have to ask myself, I have to remember, do I want a lasting connection with this person that I'm talking with? And that really reframes a lot of conversation, a lot of the dialogue. You have to think about the connection you have with the person. If there's a way you can establish clear parameters, do it. Hi, it's inauguration day. I'm emotionally and mentally exhausted. I really can't have a conversation at all. So Sarah, I'm happy to sit here today and just kind of take it in passively. That is okay. That is okay. Or I'd rather just talk and chat. I do not want to be put on the spot. That's why I started out with this. We're all sort of fatigued. Most of us are feeling pretty fatigued on this topic. I'm just checking chat. Oh, Nikki added things that make her uncomfortable. We're going to pause for a second so you all can reflect and think about what makes Nikki uncomfortable. Not being prepared, having enough time to prepare. Yep. Not knowing enough on a topic. Yep. On having to have an opinion. Crash course and getting more comfortable with uncertainty. Awesome. Yes. Raise those stakes. Hot weather. I prefer cold. I'm flipped to that. Action without planning. Oof, me too. Ooh, yeah. Agreed. Kimber says, I'm also a winter girl, no hot days. And Courtney says, something that makes me uncomfortable, fear of getting things wrong, being asked my opinion on something I don't feel like I know enough about. Yeah. And, those sorts of, again, it's framing, it's understanding and coming back with, I don't know much, but this I do know. So I can tell you the little bit that I do know. And this is why I feel this way. Or putting it on, the center and saying, I actually don't know much. What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And then sometimes that helps build dialogue. Yeah, those are fantastic. Thank you all for sharing those. Cool. So I hope you took the time to write down those setting intentions before having that conversation, because this is something that should be knee-jerk. When difficult things come up, you should be asking yourself these questions in your head. This will already get you mentally prepared to either go there or not. Cool. All right, intellectual humility. Let's talk a little bit about that. And that was a perfect chat that leads us right into this. And that's just not feeling like we know enough about a topic. So I know this was one of the videos that I had asked people to watch, but since we opened up sort of the group to people outside of your half block, I want to show this 3-minute clip on intellectual humility. And then if people are willing and want to, you can write in chat or just shout out your thoughts on what you think about this main tenet in being able to broach difficult conversations.
We've all been in arguments, and it wouldn't be an argument if you didn't believe that you were right and they were wrong. But aren't we all wrong sometimes? No one is right about all the things all the time. Research shows that admitting that we might be wrong can actually help us be better friends, happier people, and more effective advocates for our beliefs. This is called intellectual humility, and it's a gift. Not the kind you're born with, but the kind you can give yourself. So why don't we? Why is it so hard to admit that we might be wrong? In our minds, our ideas, assumptions, and experiences weave together to form our picture of the world. So you can see why it's painful to admit that something we believe in is wrong. One tug on the thread, and it can feel like our whole sense of self is unraveling. In fact, studies show that our brains actually react to attacks on our beliefs the same way as threats to our physical well-being. Our natural human tendency is to avoid those threats, surround ourselves with people who think just like us. It doesn't matter how smart or well-educated you are, anyone can fall into these traps. But we can break out of these bubbles. Our ideas don't need to limit us. We just need to remember that some of the things we know are wrong or incomplete. It doesn't have to feel like a failure. It can feel like a relief. We can let go of the ideas that were holding us back from growth. This is one of the key features of intellectual humility, that willingness to accept and admit that you might be wrong. Early research shows that people who practice intellectual humility make more thoughtful decisions, have stronger connections with their friends and partners, and are more tolerant, which could lead to a happier life. We live in a time where there's pressure to appear like you're always right. But recognizing an incompleteness in our knowledge isn't weakness or ignorance. It's the opposite. It turns every day into an opportunity to learn and grow. In fact, people who practice intellectual humility are shown to be better at recognizing persuasive arguments. That means you could be a more effective advocate for your beliefs by allowing them to be challenged. The scientific method asks us to test every idea, question every theory, and that discipline is responsible for much of the explosive progress that has defined the last 2 centuries. Intellectual humility is the same principle applied to the individual, constantly refining your understanding of the world and yourself. The person you are now only exists because the person you were was willing to grow into something new. Intellectual humility is that willingness. It allows us to constantly search through our understanding of the world and bit by bit, make it better. Learn more about research on intellectual humility at templeton.org/discoveries.
Oh no, did you not hear it? Did you not hear it the whole time?
I was able to hear it. I'm not sure for other folks, but the video wasn't working. Like we weren't able to, I wasn't able on my end, and I'm not sure if this was for everybody else. Well, I wasn't able to see the video, but the audio came through just fine.
Oh no. Oh shoot. Well, I'm sorry. I was so invested in watching it that I didn't I didn't see it till too late. Were you all able to listen and accurately sort of pick up on what it is that was being said? I hope. I'm happy to play it again if not. We're good? Okay. Okay, my apologies. See, this is what I'm talking about with that steep learning curve with technology. There's always something that happens. But okay, with this idea of intellectual humility that was brought to you by the Templeton Foundation, I was fortunate enough to attend a webinar from the University of Pennsylvania. And Dr. Leah Howard, who's a political scientist, I was so incredibly just engaged with her content on democratic dialogue and how to how important intellectual humility is. And they actually played this clip, and I wanted to share and like pass that on and share that knowledge with you, because I found it to be so profoundly such a profound truth with all of us, regardless of background and circumstances, that we all really cling to our truths, and it is part of our identity. And so with that in mind, what part of that video or that audio really spoke to you? Anybody at all? So I want you to think about intellectual humility with difficult conversations, with people that you know you have engaged in the past and that you will likely have a conversation with again, and how that will play a role in moving forward. And how can you apply this lens when talking about difficult topics, okay? And sometimes it's simply a matter of asking the why and asking, tell me more, asking people to explain viewpoint too, and that acknowledgement and that. All right, let's keep moving. Timeliness. All right, here is an acronym that will really help, hopefully this aware, right? So recognizing what you have energy for. As I said, these are all really reliant on where it is you are, like so many variables, come to play. So this is a really cool way to help recognize, is this the time, the place, the person you need to be having the conversation with? Okay, first and foremost is putting yourself first, acknowledging your own feelings, right? And be explicit, right? If it's something that's challenging and a challenging subject is surfacing, honestly, noting how you feel can really give the signals, the cues to the receiver that they need. Like, hey, I didn't sleep at all last night. I had a child that was vomiting all night long. And so like, I recognize this is something that really matters to you, but could we maybe talk about this at another time? I mean, whatever it is, acknowledging what your mindset is and really whether you have the space to handle it. Wait and watch your preconceptions, okay? We all have hidden biases. We all have biases on topics. My students know what mine are. And I acknowledge that there's a lot of that personal recognition of, I take umbrage against the NFL. And so pretty much Dexios, DM2, when he does any speech in organized athletics, he knows I'm going to heckle him more than I probably should, just because of my own biases against organized sports, right? I acknowledge that. So thinking about what your own preconceptions are, and a lot of those come from confirmation bias, right? So understanding that, hey, I may be, limited in my understanding of this just based on the community that I'm in that reaffirms that value or this idea or this truth, right? Based on where I am. And we are who we are. A huge part of that, our fabric, is because of the community that we're around. So understanding that, take that pause there to do that. Anticipating responses. Okay, so this is challenging. You can't, again, going back to conversations are not formulaic, but there are certain responses that when people use, that is my abort mission. And the two, and those are called logical fallacies most of the time. So if somebody uses a logical fallacy that they won't budge from, it usually is a signal to me that I just need to abort the mission. And that doesn't mean like, whatever, and I walk away. It's saying like, oh, you know what, I think I think we need to probably just agree to disagree, but I appreciate like the attempt or whatever it is, and have it, you can have a lame-o ending. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be this beautiful, eloquent ending to the conversation, but the idea that, so there are two things that I really am sensitive about. And the first is the ad hominem, which is a personal attack. And so it's someone that directly attacks your character based on what you believe, right? Oh, of course you feel that way. Well, yeah, you work at CC. Of course, that's what you're going to say. And I cannot tell you how often I've heard that. Before I've even shared my opinion, I already know what you think and how you feel, how you believe. Thank you very much. I'm like, and so of course it's hard not to get on the defense. And I always, I try alternate routes, again, depending on circumstance, acknowledging my own feelings. Am I in the mood, whatever. But if I am, I do try. And if it's still not, then I just abort the mission. And the second is people that rely on cliches as truisms, and they won't budge from it. And so one of the ones that really comes to mind that I could use is when I'm having a conversation about gender norms, someone I was speaking with, the response was, well, boys will be boys. And I tried to kind of come around it, to ask more questions, and they wouldn't budge. No, boys will be boys. And you can't budge, like it's an impasse, right? Like if that is fundamentally, foundationally an ideology that you have, then we can't further the conversation, right? And so it's like, okay, well, on that point, I think we have to agree to disagree. Really stop the urge of following up with, you're wrong, because that is my problem, is wanting to follow up with, well, actually, or, well, you're wrong. And that doesn't leave that person walking away with going, oh my gosh, she told me I was wrong. Well, yeah, now I'm going to look at the world totally differently. Remember, change doesn't happen in the space of the conversation. It will never happen when you're uncomfortable, when you're taking risks. Change only happens after the fact. And that's not just with the person you're having the conversation with, that's with you as well. Okay. Breathe, respirate. You know what? Public speaking, I tell you what, the scariest thing, there's a lot of scary things that I have people tell me, and this runs the runs the gambit of not just students, but it's adults as well. There's a couple of things. It's fear that your content will have no impact, that it'll be completely forgotten. That's one. The second one that I hear all the time is fear that they will forget everything. So they're going to get up and be like, I have no idea what I'm going to say. And that fear of looking ignorant, right? And the third one is dealing with uncomfortable silence. And I ask you to take this third tenet and really embrace silence. It is so okay to process. It is so okay to reflect. It is so okay to get up and get a glass of water and think about what it is the other person is saying. It's okay to press the reset button. So many of us are in this sort of rat race mindset where we have to get everything out. No, recognize that difficult subjects take time. Right? You're sifting through your emotions. You're acknowledging like, hey, sorry, this is making me really emotional. I'm sorry, I'm really uncomfortable. I know my face is flushing. Oh, I need a minute. Take the time. And then take the time to be able to say, you know what, I can't move forward. This is too hard for me. And I want to come back to this later, but right now I was up all night because my kid was throwing up and I really can't talk about this. Whatever it is, and it's not an excuse, but I ask you, as I said in that third or fourth slide, but come back to it. Don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on the other person. Just keep pushing forward to starting and finishing difficult conversations too. And it also gives you time to read more about it too, educate, ask more questions, follow up with a text like, hey, when you said this, like, what did you mean by that, right? I can't tell you how often I get these articles from people or, things that are meant to just rile me up because people love to see me all riled up. That's part of who I am, right? I embrace emotion and I get into conversations. And so often I'll follow up with like 5 questions via text and be like, all right, I thought about this, but I want you to tell me more, And so time, silence. Prepare for next time. Educate yourself. That's sort of what I was linking to with the text. And so you can prepare for the next time, maybe not the same person, but maybe pushing further on the conversation, right? We don't have a lot of time, so don't really want to spend time on reframing the metaphor, but rather than thinking of this is a cultural war I'm engaging in, where you become defensive and angry really easily, thinking it as more of you're mentally breaking bread with that person. Graciousness, be a host. We're all people. We're all people. And if both of you are willing to invest, have mutual respect, again, no ad hominems, no personal attacks. We're both trying to engage and understand each other more. Put aside your fight face. I ask you, put aside that fight face. It's hard. It is personal and it is tied to our identity. I acknowledge that. And there's a lot of variables at play. But I go back to where we all are aligned, is where we all play an important role in the cog that is Colorado College. We're all here for growth and understanding and wanting to be better. And if your goal is to build community, so we stop seeing so much chaos, you have to try. Okay. Keeping an eyeball on the time. So we won't go into breakout groups, but I do want you to be thinking about social media for change and advocacy, ? What your role, how you use social media, is it a distraction? Is it purpose-driven? And because I know I come from a space of bias, I intentionally framed it with positives first. Social media can disseminate information quickly. We know this can be problematic, though, if we think about this. However, it could also be a source for good, too. Social media is now accessible to most populations in the West. It can create united fronts when we are feeling so isolated, especially in these pandemic times. We can create ways to avoid people who do fan flames when we're in a mental and emotional space, to not be around hate and divisiveness. And we can find new people to help build our community. It can help build genuine community, and it links strangers that would normally not have met. And that's really special, okay? But because it is so convenient and it is a distraction, can be, it also drives this idea of slacktivism, where if I post this post or I black out my picture, I'm checking a box, okay? Thinking about impacts. Are they lasting? How can you use social media to make more lasting impacts? Comment streams are breeding grounds for obnoxious and illogical arguments. Hands down, hardcore, hard stance. I won't move from that. And they are a distraction, and they create a nation divided, right? So with that in mind, think about what you can do, how you can communicate online. I'm pulling up chat. Kimber, yes, boys will be boys. I say girls will be girls. Usually gets people to ask me what I mean. Yes. Thank you, Nikki. Yeah. Thinking about, instead of fixating on the wrong in social media, it's a part of our lives. It is a part of how we learn and get information quickly, how you can change to rebuild community. Again, this is acknowledging that people struggle with seeing the person behind the screen. And so the response is going to be very difficult. The responses you're going to get, you're using a lot of energy. And going back to this idea of purpose driven and having community, building community and communicating on difficult topics. Do we want this to be our knee-jerk way to talk about different things when the standard of how we communicate is less than ideal when it comes to divisive issues? Okay. What can you do with your time that's different, and having conversations and allow opportunity for conversations with a real person, even if it's just one, versus commenting? If you do, build bridges. Building community means following these tactics: warmth, responsiveness, inquisitiveness, asking questions, being tentative, and extending empathy. It is really hard. Extending empathy means no judgment. It's understanding that that person really, really believes in what they're saying. If you can't do it, perhaps commenting online is not the way to go, right? If you have something to get out and you don't want someone to respond in a way that questions the why behind your belief system, write a blog. Write a blog. I just want you to think about your role in social media and how it's been the last 10 years in time and diversion and purpose driven. And I want you to come back and say, Sarah, I am purpose driven in communication. And this is what I've done on social media that I know I have made impact. But I want you to consider something too. And I'm happy to hear. I want to hear what it is you're doing, because I know there is good that comes out with social media and getting information out there. I know it exists. And I want you to show me and tell me new ways. But I want you to consider something too. One other thing on that is that our circle of interests, like things that we like to read about and engage in, and it's so broad, it's so big, right? The world is literally at our fingertips with our devices. I can read news story after, I will never be able to read enough news stories to catch up, right? It's constant. It's a constant ticker tape of information. Huge amount of things that I'm interested in reading about, okay, is very different than the circle of impact that I have on things that I'm interested in talking about and making impact in those areas. So when thinking about diplomatic dialogue, the impact I have versus the circle of interest I have on social media, those are two very different things, okay? When thinking about listening, if you cannot do these 6 steps, don't have the difficult conversation, right? If you're at a basketball game and it's really loud and there's whistles blowing in a non-COVID world, right? Having a conversation about gun control may not be the best time and place. I have colleagues that'll disagree with you, but their MO is speech and debate. So really nothing's off limit at any points. But for the most part, if you can't pay attention and you know you're distracted by something else, don't have a difficult conversation. And I know we're all guilty of maybe being on the phone or doing something else while listening to someone talk about something that's very important. Right? So that's something little that you can do. Like you walk away and you're like, all right, next time somebody talks about something hard, I promise to not get distracted. I won't even be doing the dishes. Okay. Empathy, suspending judgment. Do you have time to reflect upon what's being said? That means allowing for silence, allowing for time to ask for clarity, where you can summarize ideas and saying, all right, this is what you're thinking. This is how I'm feeling. We need to kind of walk away. But you take that information and even going away and sharing it with somebody else and knowing like, ooh, I can't wait to talk to someone about how they felt about this because I never thought about it in this way before, right? Those are huge components. And that takes us from passive listening to active listening. This quotation at the top of this slide, y'all, I cannot emphasize this enough. Listening does not mean agreement. Just because you're silent, you're not accepting what they're saying. Respecting a person with different perspectives is not the same thing as legitimizing them. You're judging their ideas and not the person behind the ideas. How often do we judge the person based on their ideas? That's my clock. Sorry. Timing. It's everything. Okay. These are some direct questions to help fuel empathy, right? Offering empathy. I'm going to break this down and make it really easy. If anybody wants, they can share what they believe. What are some steps to how do you actually get into that empathetic mindset? All right, see, these are the bullet points kind of give you ideas that lead us there. But first and foremost, I'll give you the first one. So the first, for empathy, you have to be active listening. So those 6 steps that I gave you before, that has to be in place to be able to apply empathy. Has to. Right? Otherwise, you're distracted. You don't have the time, the mindset, whatever it is, you're not going to get there. You might get to sympathy, but empathy is very different. Empathy is having compassion for somebody who you do not necessarily feel like having compassion for, or that you have a visceral distaste for based on their belief system. Okay, that's hard. That's not something that comes easily for most of us. How do you break offering empathy into steps? Yeah, Kimber, great, thank you. You have to have genuine interest in other person's well-being after that interaction, okay? You're invested in that person to be able to have empathy, yep, beyond the conversation. And this can really help us with our difficult familial dynamics, right? We know we're invested, extending empathy, trying to suspend that judgment. That's number 2. Suspending judgment. No matter what, I cannot let judgment creep in. That's really hard. That's an intentional effort. Judgment's going to creep in if they disagree with you. Again, going back to intellectual humility, we don't want and we don't like to be wrong about something, especially if it's a really important something that we feel we know a lot about and we've constructed truth around. Empathy is, oh, Courtney, thank you. For empathy, you should also be sensitive to your own privilege, yes, and the experiences and identities that the person you are talking to inhabits. Absolutely. And that leads right into recognizing emotions in other people. Back to that slide that I sent, that beautiful paragraph on debating and emotions. Just because you're able to remain calm and the person you're speaking with gets emotional, acknowledge that. Their experience is vastly different than yours. And your ability to remain calm and in control is power. Acknowledge that. Be explicit. We think those things a lot of times because we come from a space of power within the college. We understand power dynamics, but we don't say it. Hey, this is hard. I can see this is hard. I care about you. We don't have to have this conversation right now. Right? That fourth one leads right into what I just did, which is communicating that said emotion. Talk about the emotion. It doesn't have to be pretty or poetic. Acknowledge it. We're not robots, okay? When people feel heard, understood, there's connection there. There's value. You feel valued. So even though you're coming from very different spaces, respect is built. And that's how we build community, right? There's the only way to do it is to really connect with other people. Okay. Thinking about moving forward. Always remember, and I mentioned this earlier, changes will not happen during the talk that we have today. And then moving forward, when you have talks with others, changes happen gradually and with time. So don't give up if you don't see results. Always ask yourself, are you planning on talking for a victory? Or are you trying to learn about alternative perspectives? That kind of sums up a lot of that breaking down intellectual humility, okay? And then it's personal. We're all coming from different spaces and different intentions, different motives. We're all purpose-driven and we have different roads and different paths that we're on. So think about how you can practice and apply some of these things. Does anybody want to share what their next step might be? And I'll let you decide. I see somebody wrote in chat. When you plant the seed, you never see the tree in its growth. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think probably one of my favorite stories as a teacher, I taught for 5 years in public schools before going into higher ed. And my first year of teaching, I look back on that and I cringe a lot talking about what makes me uncomfortable. I'm like, oof, I knew nothing and I was up there. You just feel so inadequate in so many ways, but I had all this passion and enthusiasm and I was teaching speech debate and theater and film and just having this great time. And 10 years later, following that, I had a student that I randomly saw at a wedding, at a mutual friend's wedding, and all grown up, in his mid-20s. And he came up and just said, I just cannot tell you, you pushed me in a totally different direction than I was in, and just really complimented the film class that I was teaching it. And I was so shocked because in my head, I had, had this mindset of I absolutely was a bumbling disaster. And then here's this grown-up who the impact I had, I could not believe in it. It was humbling. It was a moment of pride for me as an educator too, to realize like, you don't know the impacts. Give it your best shot. It's not going to be perfect and certainly not going to be poetic, but give it your best shot and don't give up and come at it again. You just never know what sort of impacts you're making with folks. Okay. And I leave you with one last thing. I had the incredible privilege of watching Dr. Edmonds give this speech to the University of Mississippi over Martin Luther King weekend. And I was floored. And so I had to pull some from his speech because it had so much power and it moved me so incredibly much that I wanted to share his words. It all starts with a conversation. It starts with, and then it becomes a series of conversations. And if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling like you need more, I am here to support you. Reach out to me, ask questions. I want you to be equipped to be a leader in encouraging democratic dialogue moving forward. Thank you for your time. Thank you for allowing me to talk at you most of the time because I had a lot of information. And I hope to see you all again very, very soon. And I'm here for questions or if anybody has anything they want to say following this too.
I just want to jump in real quick and thank you, Sarah. That was phenomenal. I have once again just scribbled a billion notes of things for me to reflect on, and so greatly appreciate you being here and being vulnerable in this space and sharing so much of yourself. I greatly appreciate that. So yeah, we do have a little bit of time if folks have questions or comments, reflections that you all would like to share with the group.
You're so welcome, everyone. Yes, thank you for coming. I know this day was just, it was just a crazy day. So I'm so thankful and grateful for your emotional and mental space. You can do it.
I was just gonna say lots of love in the chat and can definitely pick up on that vibe of it's been exhausting in a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons. So definitely get that.
Yeah.
Like sharing that's totally fine. But appreciate seeing the love come through in the chat from folks.
Yes, definitely. All the love. Thank you. I'm so convicted to have difficult conversations, and I know not everyone is, and so I'll recognize that space. So yeah, again, this is just about taking steps moving forward and not perfection. So you've got this.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. All right. You all take care. Get some rest. Decompress.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Greatly appreciate you popping in and engaging with us. I hope that you took something away from this session as well. And of course, Sarah is a part of our CC community. You can reach out to her anytime if you have follow-up questions. So thanks y'all for joining us and have a fantastic afternoon.